first day I reported to my new duty station as a senior executive was 9/11. And this is where life rapidly shifted in short order a little bit later that morning. And I pause because even to this day, and I feel it right now emotionally, okay? You're probably going to see it in my face because almost 3,000 people were murdered that day and they never should have disappeared. They never should have lost their lives. It never should have happened. I literally am haunted the rest of my life with that reality, the what ifs of history. I still wake up sometimes in, sweating over the what ifs of history. I pause again because did I know, even though the system was blinking red since 1998 per George Tenet at the CIA, they knew that Al-Qaeda was up to something. Remember 93 when I was sitting there on the terrorism desk?
Yep.
It's not like we didn't know. It's not. Remember, we already had Cole Incident, Kaibar Towers, a bunch of others. But it wasn't a priority. Bush was the new president. Wasn't a priority. Counterterrorism was not even on the list. It was on a list, but it wasn't where it mattered. Just wasn't. And I went home, and I remember calling in very early the next morning. Of course, I sat in front of the TV. I just sat there, just absolutely. It was hard to break away.
Everybody went home.
I went home because I was so new.
Right.
They had crisis teams. Remember, there had been crises.
Yeah. Okay.
This clearly was going to be something way different. And remember, there were other planes that they had attempted, or one of them we know, Shanksville, right? Pentagon, right?
Yep.
It would have been way worse if they hadn't hit the part of the Pentagon that had just recently been modernized. And then, of course, the two towers. People don't realize those towers are actually quite susceptible to that type of terrorist attack.
Right.
And it wasn't like there hadn't been attempts. Bohica had been exposed where they're going to hijack airliners. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Remember. But 93 sort of had been forgotten, I guess. Remember what they said. Remember the general, what he said to me personally, right?
Yep.
I was right there when he said it.
Yep.
So I went home because I wasn't part of a crisis team. I called in later, said, yeah, you better come in. And then the next 4 months are a blur, a total blur. It would take hours and hours, if not days, to unwind those next 4 years. But it's critical that I then tell you what I was confronted by. Because what I was confronted by was the very thing that I had taken an oath to support and defend. And yet I was confronted in the secret world with what happens if your own government decides to violate the Constitution? Willfully, as an act of commission. Not omission, commission. I mean, I'll even ask this rhetorically to any and all of your listeners, okay?
Mm-hmm.
Right? Subscribers. What if you're confronted? Do you just, as I was, look the other way? So I'm in 4 months later. I didn't even become feeling normal again. And I was sitting there in a Marriott hotel in New Orleans celebrating Mardi Gras in mid-January with family. So what happened after 9/11? A whole bunch of meetings were taking place. Cheney, who had basically been given the national security portfolio by Bush, just kind of ceded that to him.
Yep.
Plus energy. They went into like deep emergency mode, right? And there were certain, may have heard of COG, continuity of government.
Yep.
I used to be a part of that in terms of what happens if, right? Special procedure put into place. There's actually emergency executive orders on the books, right? So they went into a version of that.
Yeah, can you explain that to people who may not know what it is?
So what happens if, it could be an extreme natural disaster, it could be war, right?
Yep.
Where the president, as the executive, does have where certain emergency powers are allowed to invoke. He can invoke certain and there's basically a standing set of executive orders basically, that, and some are acts, right, that prescribe what you do. And there's basically, there's facilities where government can reassemble. They
Right.
even go through training for that, right? So he's down in the Situation Room, which is underneath the White House.
Cheney
In particular, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, Bush would be there too, but Cheney he basically was leading. And of course, they're having these meetings right after 9/11. What else can we do? What else can we do? Are there any other authorities? There are certain executive orders, without getting into the weeds, that allow the government to increase their ability, right, to provide protection for the country. Still has to be within the bounds of the Constitution. You're not allowed, even under emergency circumstances, to basically suspend the Constitution. You're not.
Right.
But there are things where you have some flexibility. Okay, even under FISA, I'm going to introduce FISA under the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act, which we had annual training to ensure that, because of scandals in the 70s, to ensure that we did not, without a warrant, right, we couldn't just routinely collect, except under special training circumstances.
Sure.
And even then, it was highly controlled.
Right.
You couldn't collect, analyze, et cetera, because that's sacrosanct. It's the Fourth Amendment, okay?
Right.
Super high bar. But
Right.
you can. And even under FISA, there was provisions to hot pursuit, meaning you could go after somebody, foreign intelligence, U.S. person, U.S. citizen, resident, basically foreign, but resident, right?
Okay.
Legal resident, right? / visitor, but legal. Could be visa, could be green card, or some equivalent, or there's different visas.
Okay.
Or, interestingly enough, U.S. corporation. That not just stateside, not just boundaries, but also overseas.
Okay.
Which means even when I was in RC 135, we couldn't just start collecting. Now, we did have a emergency support mission. If someone was in distress, ship in distress or in distress, we then could help assist. But that was specifically to help save lives or
Right.
rescue, search and rescue.
Right. Sure.
So FISA had criminal sanctions. You violate it, $10,000 fine, 5 years in prison for every incident in which you violate the Fourth Amendment rights of a U.S. person.
Okay.
Criminal use, the 18, U.S. 18, right? That's the criminal code. I pause because here I was. Shortly after 9/11, I discovered that they were taking the vast power of NSA, extraordinary power in which they essentially had carte blanche to do just about anything when it came to collection.
Mm-hmm.
But now use that vast power, in addition to overseas, use that vast power. Remember, they had failed. Remember, that's why Pearl Harbor, what happened was so critical, because the whole thing, this whole national security establishment was set up after the end of World War II was to preclude another surprise attack.
Yeah.
Here, not only were we, quote, I'll say surprised, we weren't, failed to keep 3,000 people. We did not keep them out of harm's way. That's our fundamental, right? We failed the nation. Mm-hmm. The workforce knew it. Management leadership went into denial mode. They just could not accept, right? Workforce, I could tell you just horror stories about what it was doing to the workforce, because this is not supposed to, it's on our watch. We are the watchers. We're the protectors of the nation electronically. We failed. And they're asking what you can imagine. Congress is now asking questions. What the heck happened? Now, I will be the first to acknowledge it was a systemic failure. Okay? And there's a lot of reasons for that. But NSA had a critical part of all this in terms of what they should have known, could have known, and didn't provide and report, even with the mess of their IT and the databases and everything else that I mentioned earlier. Mm-hmm. I'm finding out that they're now turning the vast years of NSA in partnership with certain key corporations for access and retrieval on the U.S. U.S. was always blacked out and allies, right? You didn't just routinely spy on your friends, quote unquote. You didn't. Sort of. It was
When did this
bad.
happen?
It was bad form. This is September. Remember, September 11th. So in the 2 weeks after 9/11, I'm finding out the decisions had been made in the deepest of secrecy, super hush hush.
Right.
We're going to essentially suspend the Fourth Amendment. We will bypass FISA. There's special procedures. Even at one point, I was part of the affidavit process. We go up to the secret court, which is housed in the Department of Justice, to provide affidavit to say we need a warrant from the secret judges, which are actually on rotation, appointed by the Chief Justice.
And you bypass the secret judges.
Bypass FISA. They wouldn't even know about it in the early days, the early years.
Holy
Didn't even know about it. Bypassed it. So, I mean, you talk about what do I do? I'm saying, wait a minute. I took an oath to support and defend the Constitution. Now my government is suspending that part of the Constitution because they've, under the imprimatur of national security, it's necessary. I began to blow the whistle within September, within channels at NSA. That's where I started. Boss, Office of General Counsel, stopped there, because then I went to Inspector General later.
Okay.
Office of General Counsel. I'm on a phone call with him. This is early October.
How much thought did you put into this before you started to blow the whistle? Before you started
a lot, but it was all super compressed. Because remember, I had a full-time job. I was leading a team, communications. How do you keep people informed as they're coming in round the clock? People are burning out. You can't get people burnt out. You can only sustain crisis mode for so long.
Right.
Usually about a week or two, and then you just start getting fried. People are having heart attacks. People are collapsing. People are sleeping in the cars out in the parking lot.
Jesus Christ.
Because they realize, oh my God, you can imagine people's guilt, the guilt they felt.
Yeah.
And so they're doubling down, but they're burning themselves out.
Right.
And I was in all the leadership team meetings, right? The ones I weren't in, the only ones I weren't in were the ones that were my supervisor, who was the number 3 person, the signals intelligence director. She would have special meetings with the very top dick, right? I was a much smaller, even smaller. I was part of sort of the 40, but then there was sort of like the 7 or 10.
And by the way, sorry to clarify, who specifically was making the orders to that, or who was specifically telling you or instructing you that now we're going to start bypassing the secret court and the FISA?
Well, this is where I had my moment of truth.
Okay.
True moment of truth. I already was aware that they were shifting equipment, buying equipment from like the HPs of the world to put them on US networks to quote unquote consume and just suck up all kinds of data.
Okay.
Just raw data. No constraints, didn't matter. Okay. Bulk collection is what they called it, but it's really mass surveillance.
Right.
Without getting into deep, but they starting with, phone calls, starting, emails, later expanded very quickly.
How long of a time period are we talking?
Only a couple of weeks.
Couple of weeks, phone calls, emails.
Right, I already started. Remember, I already had the capacity to do all that. Already had all that. Yes, I became directly aware of it. Then I started poking around.
Okay.
I was making trouble already, good trouble. Okay. Okay. Good trouble. Early on. I was already being tagged. I remember I was a new hire and I'm already being tagged. So what do you do? So I confront the Office of General Counsel. Now, it turns out because this program is so secret, it was in its own compartment. The name of the program was its own compartment, which was inside what they call exceptionally controlled information, ECI, which is way beyond even SCI. But it had its own compartment. Its own compartment was the name of the program. This program name in itself was classified.
You never said it.
Oh, no, I can say it now.
Oh, you can?
But back then, people who said it was way under their breath.
What was it called?
Stellar Wind.
Oh, okay.
We called it, colloquially between us, cosmic fart.
That's amazing.
Okay, so Stellar Wind, interesting name, but there's a whole office that handles program project names.
Very famous
but the name
now.
But the name itself, right? The program name itself, which is extraordinarily rare because the program in itself is used as a cover. This program was so secret. It turns out
more secret than secure What is SCI?
Yes.
Compartmented.
Sensitive compartmented information.
Yeah.
Now there's handling caveats, which are basically compartments or can be.
Right.
How do you distribute? Right. There's classified, secret, top secret, standard. But then there's the SCI world and above. Okay.
Got it.
And it just gets hyper, you get super secret. The more there's Q level, what we call Q level clearance, which was for like nuclear stuff.
Okay.
My mom is a secretary at Barksdale, where she met my dad because he was, in Strategic Air Command back in the mid 50s. Had a Q clearance because she was the secretary for one of the senior officers.
Holy shit.
Because she's looking at stuff that's quite sensitive, right?
Yes,
even though she was
right.
an administrative assistant, right?
Right. Okay. I got it. Wow.
So.
Just a couple of weeks before they start sucking up phone calls and emails from from everybody.
They thought, they didn't know if there was another attack. I understand why they did what they did. I understand. I get that. And I remember under a short term, you're allowed to go after threats without a warrant, but you still have to go seek it shortly thereafter. It's all prescribed in FISA. But they didn't say, we don't have time for that. Forget it. Don't have time for it. Just bypass it. Right. They just wanted the data. Now, why? I'm incredibly alarmed at the developments within just a couple of weeks.
Okay.
First week in October, turns out it's also, I didn't know it at the time, was officially when the president's surveillance program went into effect. It's called the PSP under Bush. PSP, President's Surveillance Program.
Okay.
Umbrella program, authorized by the president. The primary umbrella program at NSA, which became the executive agent, right, for the program was Stellar Wind. That was the umbrella program itself, encompassing a number of other sub-programs.
Got it.
There was one counsel that I'm aware of, I mean, based on my understanding even to this day, there was one particular lawyer in the Office of General Counsel. He was actually interviewed once as part of a larger NPR Frontline report. Actually, I was interviewed for that. Myself, Diane Rourke, Bill Binney, Kirk Wiebe, Ed Loomis. I'm on the phone. I said, what are we doing? We're violating the Fourth Amendment. FISA is and there was a whole set of internal NSA. Nothing is done without, you have to have authorities, right? And it goes all the way down to just like individual procedures, standing procedures. NSA had and been refined over the years based on the FISA. FISA had been updated 5 times to keep up with the times since 1978.
Wow.
Most people don't realize that. So they had special procedures for handling FISA because you're quote unquote spying on a U.S. person with sometimes without a warrant initially. But the normal procedure was you have to get the warrant, right, up front. So I said, what are we doing? He says, exigent conditions apply. Direct quote, exigent conditions apply. We just need the data. Don't ask any more questions, Mr. Drake. I say, wait a minute.
This is the attorney.
The attorney inside the Office of General Counsel who happened to be read into the program.
Oh, thank you, Steve, for defining it for my 3rd grade education. Situations that allow law enforcement to conduct warrantless searches and seizures under certain urgent conditions. Okay. Exigent circumstances apply. We have to go outside the Constitution here.
Yes. Right there. That's yeah. Now, hot pursuit, that is allowed. Hot pursuit was allowed under FISA for a short period of time.
Oh, okay.
It was. It wasn't like, exigent, but there was a legal standard built into FISA, Fourth Amendment compliant, but you could temporarily, because sort of the immediacy of it, you could actually go after, surveil a U.S. person. What if they were intending harm? What if it was that immediate? But remember, okay? Sure. That's one reason it was there. That was actually in the FISA. All that was bypassed. Okay, I mean bypass meaning it was going to be a permanent, warrantless, basically a general warrant, which is actually unconstitutional. Now, some would say people even then said, Tom, you don't understand. You didn't make the decision. Shut up. Be quiet. Things will take care of themselves. This is a crisis. Sometimes we have to do things differently. Mm-hmm. I kept talking. So back to the conversation with this attorney. I said, well, then why don't we go to Congress? Congress legislates. One of the things that's happening now, you see this in Trump 2.0, where even Congress, you get into this whole thing about can executive override or can they well, I guess that's another conversation. Legislates. If the law of the land and FISA, which applies in this case, is no longer sufficient. Remember, they passed the Patriot Act a couple months later, actually late October.
Right.
Basically, which another component in all this, to begin
so literally the next month, right?
To begin legalizing what was okay, to begin legalizing, they did through acts, which is ex post facto, which in itself, ex post facto law, which in itself, that's unconstitutional. You can't pass a law to, in essence, legalize what you were doing or conducting, if even executive action, that was unlawful or unconstitutional, particularly if it's unconstitutional.
Right.
But remember, FISA ultimately falls under the Fourth Amendment. Okay. It is a statute in law with criminal sanctions if you violate it. Mm-hmm. Didn't matter anymore. All this didn't matter. I was told it's a quaint document. It's another conversation. Dustbins of history. We live in different times now, Mr. Drake.
Okay.
Different times. We're just going to be different. We're just going to take the thing that makes us American, the very thing that defines the foundational law of the land. Go to Congress. I'm talking to the attorney. Go to Congress, change the law. He says, with what we want to do, they would say no. In that moment, right as he said it, hair standing up on the back of my neck. Because I realized in that moment of truth, it didn't matter what law was. It didn't matter. We're not going to even bother. If they were so worried that if they went to Congress, the Congress would say no, because they wanted to get away with this. They wanted to do this anyways. Didn't matter.